Hello, everybody. So I'll start the presentation. Okay, so first of all, made in China. It's a phrase that we've all heard. We've seen it on clothes, on toys, on clothing items. But I think the era of made in China is nearing its end, and that we're soon going to enter a new era, the era of innovated in China. And this is the topic of my presentation today. Just a very brief introduction, why am I here? My name is Cypris. I'm American and Israeli. Israel is oftentimes called Startup Nation, but I actually think that Israel could soon be dethroned as Startup Nation, and that hopefully by the end of this presentation you'll also agree that China could very well soon be the new Startup Nation. I'm a student at Yenching Academy. I was in the first cohort. My concentration was in economics and management. And this presentation is all part of my thesis research, as well as a project that I'm working on with some fellow students, Bruce as well, right here. The project itself is also called Innovated in China, and for the past year we've been going to startups and speaking to entrepreneurs, and we are trying to introduce the Chinese startup scene to the West and provide information that maybe Western readers wouldn't have access to otherwise. And our goal is to help introduce Chinese business culture and hopefully encourage partnerships between Western businesses and Chinese businesses on a simpler platform. And as I mentioned, this is all part of my thesis research, so my thesis question is, does China have the capacity and capability to not only be an economic world leader, but also become a key global player in entrepreneurship and innovation as well? So this is a brief outline. I'm not going to go into everything. Obviously, it's a big topic. You can write a whole thesis about it. But the first section is a general overview of the Chinese startup scene. The second section is more just kind of a cultural discussion, differences between Chinese and Western business culture. And the final section is just addressing the elephant in the room. Is China even really innovating? Because this is still a topic of a lot of discussion. So let's get into the first section. First of all, how is the Chinese startup scene growing and changing? Well, we are now in the 13th five-year plan in China. This plan was introduced last year in 2016, and it includes plans that are meant to last until 2020. These are kind of the main points from the five-year plan. One thing that's a very clear focus in this next plan is the heavy focus on entrepreneurship and innovation that the government is placing now, and a very clear distancing from manufacturing as the main source of economic growth for the country. Manufacturing is not necessarily a sustainable growth model, and so entrepreneurship and innovation is the direction that the government's headed in. One thing it's doing is investing a lot of money into science and tech fields, and in 2016 alone, the investments by the government in these two fields were boosted to 271 billion yuan, which is the equivalent of $41 billion. Some projects that the five-year plan outlines in science and tech that are going to be further developed include brain research, national cyberspace security, medical and military robots, big data application, and more. Another area of focus is also greening, so developing ecological technology industry as well as ecological living and hopefully addressing the problem of pollution that we experience here every day. And finally, a continual opening up. So this is already happening and it's continuing to happen. Already this year there's been an easing of foreign worker visa restrictions that will enable more foreigners to come and work in China with much less bureaucracy. And we can already see programs like Yenching in the universities, or even a lot of companies that are now introducing international talent programs to encourage foreigners to come work with them, and in this way enable more global idea flow to come into China. There's also changing things in intellectual property rights legal developments. There's already been a legal framework in place since roughly the 1980s. It includes the trademark law, the patent law, and the copyright law. But as many of us know, enforcement is still a problem. So even though this legislation is in place, it's not enforced well. But this trend is there's already a positive trend happening. In 2016, and already for the past couple of years, China-based innovators have been applying for a record-setting number of patents in China. In 2016 alone, more than 1 billion patents were filed by Chinese entrepreneurs. And the fields that they're also applying for are mostly in telecoms, computing, semiconductors, and medical tech fields. This also shows the general direction that a lot of entrepreneurs are focusing on. This is a sentence by Li Keqiang. He said this in 2016 that I think reflects the main mindset for where China is headed. He said that innovation is the primary driving force for development and must occupy a central place in China's development strategy. So this is the future for where the country is hoping to grow. Now let's meet Chinese entrepreneurs. I'll try to give a brief overview. This is all based on interviews and surveys that we've done, as well as statistics, who the average Chinese entrepreneur is. So the concept of a Chinese entrepreneur is in and of itself kind of a new category. In China, profit-seeking behavior and private businesses are kind of contradictions to an ideologically communist state. So this wasn't so much a career that people could choose to go to until quite recently in the past decades. So you can learn a lot about Chinese entrepreneurs based on who chooses to become an entrepreneur in the first place. Chinese culture is deep-rooted in very close-knit families. Usually these are families with only one child. So the parents and grandparents are very invested in this one child and giving them all the resources that they can to make them successful. Many of these parents and grandparents have grown up in a period of great instability, so they hope that their children actually choose careers that are very financially secure and stable, so that they don't have to go through this kind of difficult lifestyle that they had. So what this actually means is that most of the Chinese entrepreneurs come from wealthier families who can afford to have their children engage in this riskier career path. And actually 62% of Chinese entrepreneurs come from families that already own companies. And this is a statistic that is 10% higher than in the West. So these parents can give their children guanxi, their own connections that they have. They even a lot of times provide their children's first major investments to get any project or initiative started. In terms of gender balance, the Chinese entrepreneurial scene is a lot more gender balanced than in the West. In China, it's roughly 60 to 40 in favor of men. So there's around 40% of Chinese entrepreneurs are women. China is actually the country that has the most women in the workforce worldwide. It's probably related to the population size, but it's still more gender balanced. Something very interesting, in terms of self-made female billionaires by country, 49 out of the world's 73 self-made female billionaires, so self-made doesn't include Kim Kardashian and the likes, Harrison. These are women who made their own money. So 49 out of 73 of the world's self-made female billionaires are Chinese. And what this means is that Chinese entrepreneurs are worth about 3 times more than their Western counterparts. There's 2 main reasons that can explain this phenomenon. One of them is, again, the one-child policy. So all of the family's resources, times, everything that they have is invested into this one child to make them as successful as possible. This one child is going to go on to carry a lot of people's future legacy. So it doesn't matter if this one child is a boy or a girl, they're going to be very equipped to succeed. And this, paired with the Chinese hard work ethic and filial piety, that children want to make their parents proud, means that any boy or girl who chooses to become an entrepreneur will be as successful as they can possibly be. They're given all the resources to do that. In terms of age, 44% of Chinese entrepreneurs are under the age of 35. The average age is roughly 30 in China's mainland. And to compare it to the West, in the West, the average age is around 34, so the ages are quite similar. But in China, this age is always decreasing, so every year the average is slightly lower. The slightly younger ages, once again, can be attributed to the fact that entrepreneurship is still a new career in China, so not many generations have had the opportunity to become entrepreneurs. But this is already something worth knowing. So before, those were more quantitative measurements, and in terms of qualitative, this is based on a lot of surveys that we've done and discussions with Chinese entrepreneurs. So one thing that's interesting is that a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs are actually serial entrepreneurs, which means that they don't necessarily work on only one startup. They can be divided among a lot of different projects at the same time. In comparison to Western personality traits, Chinese entrepreneurs seem to exhibit a lot more fearlessness and risk-taking than Western entrepreneurs, who maybe will try to minimize risk and take more thought-out processes, and they usually work in more linear orders. So a Western entrepreneur will focus on one project, and if it fails, it will move on to another one. And Chinese entrepreneurs spread themselves out across more fields. Another thing is also many Chinese entrepreneurs have international exposure and global awareness. Their English is usually very good. And this is again because parents who know that they want their children to become entrepreneurs realize that to make up for the business life that China has had over the past 20th century, they need to send their children abroad to bring foreign disciplines into China and get this education from abroad. So that's Chinese entrepreneurs. Also, it's important to note that those traits are not obviously all-inclusive. It's just a general profile. Jack Ma, for example, doesn't really fit any of these categories. Okay, now let's talk about Chinese startups and innovations. So if you go to any startup incubator in China or any startup, you'll probably see one of these 5 main themes over and over again. I'll talk about each in a little bit of detail. The first one is Internet of Things. Internet of Things is the internetworking of physical devices. So it's taking daily devices and connecting them to electronics or software, basically making them smart devices. One company that is dealing with Internet of Things projects is a startup incubator named Ingdan. And Ingdan is not a typical startup incubator in the sense that it is not a co-working space, but it's more of a project facilitator. So they take in only IoT startups, and they are like a supply chain. So they'll connect them to relevant suppliers and provide them with O2O services to help them kind of gain momentum and grow. Some examples of startups under Ingdan on their roster include things such as a smartphone app that can measure glucose intake. It also includes things like a smart cup that can measure how much water you're drinking every day. And true story, it even has a smart diaper, which you can figure out tells parents when it's time to change their children's diaper. I'm not sure if that's the best idea, but it exists. So these are all real startups that are working with Ingdan. Ingdan's CEO expressed his vision for the company, which is to enable young entrepreneurs to enjoy the resources held only by large companies. That's his dream to provide. The next two trends, I lumped them together because they're quite similar, virtual and augmented reality. The difference between the two of them is that virtual reality is essentially creating a situation or an environment that's not really there that the user can immerse themselves in. And augmented reality takes the existing surroundings and superimposes computer-generated images that the user can then interact with. So Pokemon Go is augmented reality. That's just the best way to differentiate between the two of them. In 2016, the VR market really took off. That was kind of at the same time the year that it was introduced and also the year that it exploded. These are some case studies of companies that are now invested in virtual and augmented reality. Big companies like Alibaba, Xiaomi, Tencent, and Baidu are all really developing these two sectors. Baidu is opening a new augmented reality lab in Beijing, and so they're really focused on that now. And it's not just company interest, there's also consumer interest in VR and AR in China. 50% of Chinese gamers have said that they would be interested in having their games be VR games. And also in another survey, Chinese game players said that they would be willing to spend up to $200 on a VR set, which is significant considering that the average income is around $12,000. In terms of statistics for startups in VR and AR, this is all as of 2016. So in 2016, 200 VR and AR startups were established, and more are emerging on a monthly basis. This is in addition to nearly 200 already established companies that are now branching out into VR and AR. Also, more than 3,000 VR internet cafes, arcades, and experience zones are popping up all over China. You can see this in even the most remote provinces. And this is a market that's not really even existent in the West yet. You can't really see these things in the States, but in China it's in a lot of places. And I think this statistic really explains this whole phenomenon. The domestic VR market is expected to grow by 36 times in the next 4 years to 55 billion yuan, which is $8.5 billion. So it's really growing. Another trend is artificial intelligence. So whereas 2016 was the year of VR, 2017 is projected to be the year that AI really takes off. The company's internet giants are all focused on AI research, and domestic venture capital funding is flowing into this field. For example, Alibaba recently acquired a 20% stake in SoftBank Robotics, which is a Japanese robotics company, and together they've created this cute little robot named Pepper. Pepper is a very advanced robot. It's designed to be a genuine day-to-day companion that can actually interact and read whoever is interacting with its mood and personality, and it evolves its own behavior to match whoever it's interacting with. And actually, so this is a very advanced system. It's one of the only humanoid robots that's capable of doing this. And the operating system for Pepper was actually developed by Alibaba. Baidu as well is also doing a lot in AI. In 2017, Baidu hired Qi Lu, who was a former Microsoft executive and an artificial intelligence expert. They hired him as their new COO as part of their plan to become a global leader in AI. And Lu is now going to be in charge of products and marketing and sales. So with him as a leading expert in AI, Baidu is really setting its sights on growing in this field as well. And even startups are working in AI now. This is one of the more well-known examples. This is a Chinese startup named iCarbonX. They became China's first biotech unicorn, in 2016, and they raised 1 billion renminbi in their first round of Series A funding, and they have a valuation already of $1 billion, and it's a biotech AI platform for health data. Finally, this one doesn't really need too much explanation because we're all familiar with these platforms, these all-encompassing platforms. One of the obvious examples is Tencent or WeChat. So WeChat, upon initial observation, seems like it's, well, people were saying it was a copy of WhatsApp, that it's just a messaging app, but that's quite laughable. With WeChat is everything basically combined in the world. WeChat has been so revolutionary actually that Facebook announced last year that it's going to introduce a new set of features that are actually copying from WeChat. So times have changed in terms of that. WeChat also announced that it's going to introduce mini programs, also known as mini apps, and this is basically like application inception. So WeChat is going to allow applications within their own app, meaning that users won't even need to download other applications. You can have one application on your phone, and through WeChat you can basically start using other applications as well. And this type of technology can completely destroy the whole App Store industry, and it could very well mean the end of Google Play and App Store as well. Alibaba is also doing a lot, and obviously Alibaba is another company that is really branching out into all industries and fields. They've already taken over e-commerce. They have even their own movie production studio called Alibaba Pictures. They even announced that they're going to start a Planet music streaming service that's going to rival Spotify and iTunes. So Alibaba as well is shooting in all directions. And this is a little-known startup named GoGo. We actually interviewed them on our site if you'd like to read more about them. But GoGo is also a social network site that is basically a combination of a lot of social media platforms that we know. So it's a kind of a combination of Facebook and Foursquare, and it's a reward system. So this too is a lot of different ideas into one. Now let's talk about Chinese business culture, what happens when it meets the West. First of all, why are people so interested in China? The most obvious reason is the numbers and market size. So anything in China that's successful is successful on a massive scale. So this is obviously very appealing. People think that they can come with an idea, and if this idea takes off, you already have 1 billion people who are talking about it. This is also related to the speed and rate of expansion, so it's very appealing the fact that ideas take off here so fast. All these trends like AI and artificial augmented reality and virtual reality have overnight kind of transformed the entire market. I think another reason why people are still interested in China is maybe also a little bit of Western hubris, or the philosophy that West knows best. So as even though China is developing, there's still people who think that it can change a lot of areas and that they want to come and kind of teach their own knowledge from home and to help teach China, which I'm not sure is necessarily the right thing, because clearly China knows what it's doing. It has proven success, and this is another thing that is very appealing to people, is everybody wants a piece of the prosperity pie. But in the next section, we're going to talk a little bit about challenges, and it's not that easy to be successful in China. A little bit about Chinese business culture. For one thing, it's very indirect and vague. So if things are not explicitly said, there's always this notion of preserving harmony in business deals and to not say things that could maybe make somebody feel uncomfortable. It's also a much more slow-moving process. In Chinese, you have expressions like man man lai, take it easy, at your pace. Patience is very important in Chinese business culture. It's a Confucian virtue that everything has its time and you need to wait for when it's the right time to do things and not rush processes. Also, you need to build trust in Chinese business culture. It's a culture that without building the other side's trust, you really will be able to not reach very far. A lot of it is based on connections and guanxi. So the people that you know can help a lot, and it really depends on developing a personal connection, not just a business relationship between business partners. Chinese business culture values hierarchy. This includes respect for elders, also respect for your authority figures, and knowing who the different players are and how to interact with them in the appropriate way. This also is related to giving respect. So you're automatically expected to give respect to certain players in the Chinese business world, and this is different in the West. Chinese business culture is, of course, surrounding saving face, preserving it for yourself and your associated circles, which means to preserve the harmony and make sure that no one's embarrassed or feels uncomfortable. That's more important than other things. And this is all related to the philosophy of the group over the individual. So it's more of a team effort and less people thinking about their own interests. In comparison, Western business culture, I'm not going to go into too much because we know it, but Western business culture, I tried to draw parallels to compare it to the Chinese business culture. So it's much more direct and definitive. Things are explicitly stated, yes means yes, no means no. This a lot of times can cause problems for people who expect that in China and are disappointed or frustrated when they don't get clear answers. It's also a much more fast-moving process. In comparison to Manmanlai, we have expressions like time is money, I don't have all day. We're showing general lack of patience. Cutting to the chase, so Chinese business meetings will usually immediately get to the topic at hand. There's not so much talking around different topics. It's much more strictly business relationships. In the West, there's more exemplification over connections. Even though connections are very important, you really need to prove and stand behind the things that you claim that you have. So you have to prove yourself. Whereas Chinese business culture respects elders, not that the Western business culture doesn't, but it's more surrounding the youth as the future, and there's less emphasis on age and hierarchy in that sense. Whereas Chinese business culture gives respect, Western business culture is more earning respect. So again, you have to prove why you deserve respect. I was trying to think what the equivalent of saving face is in Western business culture, and I think it's preserving ego. So everyone makes sure to keep their ego intact, and this is kind of the equivalent. It's a little more self-oriented than saving face, which can extend to a broader community. Also, in Western business culture, instead of preserving harmony, it's more clear winners and losers. Somebody's going to probably be correct and someone's going to be incorrect. It's more final. And then to conclude, it's more individual over the group. These are the main differences. So what actually happens when these two merge? There's a lot of challenges and clashes. Some Western fears in working with China include being scammed, being copied, or the fact that there's still limited intellectual property protection, and also misunderstanding of Chinese business culture. So Western people can perceive Chinese business people to be inefficient, indirect, and even dishonest, more because they don't necessarily understand the reasoning behind everything. On the other hand, Chinese fears working with the West can be being controlled or having Western influence distance them from their Chinese culture and heritage, which is a great source of pride in China. Also, a lack of trust rooted in a traumatic century of imperialism at Western hands. So there's still always kind of an arm's length relationship from foreigners until you're able to build their trust. And also they can misunderstand Western business culture and can perceive Western business people to be aggressive, impersonal, and insecure. So finally, we've reached the final topic. Is China even really innovating? This is a topic of a lot of debate, so can't really get into everything, but I'll try covering the main points. So is China innovating? Yes and no. Let's start with no. People who say China is not innovating will always cite the copycat culture. You have Dolce & Gabbana, Dolce & Banana, I've seen that. So people say that copycat culture in China is not only widespread, it's also even respected and admired. So good quality copies can be worth a lot of money, and so people say that with this philosophy, it's kind of hard to have an innovating culture. Also, people say that there is superficial invention or lack of depth. So when China is already inventing something new, it's not necessarily a very fleshed out idea. People also say that innovation from the top down can be a problem. So it's a government order more so than people who are from the bottom up who are innovative and are able to think of creative ideas. And finally, people say that China's education system needs to be reformed because it's currently emphasizing conformism and discipline and obedience, and these are kind of traits that are contradictions to creativity and thinking out of the box. In terms of yes, so this is by McKinsey. McKinsey defined 4 kinds of innovation. So innovation is not necessarily one thing. And so in this argument, while China may not be very advanced yet in engineering and science-based innovation, it is already very advanced in customer-focused and efficiency-driven innovation. And 2 examples that show this is obviously, people said that WeChat is a copy of WhatsApp. We know that it's completely not. And also that eBay, that Alibaba was originally a copy of eBay, and today no connection. Also, it's another argument to say that this China's strategy is more to wait for business models to prove themselves abroad. So let somebody else do the work and make all the rookie mistakes and invest the money and have ideas fail. Wait for ideas to prove themselves and take these ideas when they're already successful, and then you can localize them to the Chinese market, grow them and develop them and make them something far more advanced. So I think this in and of itself is quite an innovative solution, is to let someone else do the dirty work and carry it on from a smart stage. And also on a macro scale, I don't really think anyone can argue that China has made a very innovative transformation in 30 years that's unprecedented by any other country that's been able to change its whole situation in such a fast rate in such a short amount of time. So my personal opinion is that China is innovating. There are, of course, things to develop in, but on a broad scale, I think China is definitely going to be a very innovative country. Yeah.
Customer focused, what do you mean by that?
It's more products that are meant to help the customer like in daily life. So it's things like your taxi applications, your Didi, or Waimai, anything like that. And that's it, thank you. More info is on our site, and we have Chinese articles. You can scan the QR code.